I've done videos in the past on box office, not in a long time. And I want to do this video today because it's pretty relevant considering Avengers Endgame is tearing it up at the box office this weekend. And I need to get something off my chest. It's a fucking shit show! What you think you see, what you think you hear, that's what it's about. Mood and atmosphere. No, it's fucking garbage. It's garbage. Mood and atmosphere. Now that I really like. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I want to see. Hey folks, how you doing? Dave McRae here. Okay, this video is going to act as more of a, I don't know, I guess a rant, I guess, but it's more of a rhetorical rant. Because I do understand the situation that I'm talking about, and I do understand the why. But I do have a bit of a pet peeve. And my issue is not really with the average movie-going audience that may not understand all the variables and, you know, details at play. My pet peeve lies with those movie pundits and those who do the box office analysis and actually do know this and seem to skim over the variables and details of the broader, bigger picture of the why. And I just feel that although it's not as romantic and it's not as exciting to talk about the details of why, and you can just sort of talk about it at surface level and it sounds great and it sounds more exciting, those details are so important as to why that I just feel they're too mutually exclusive to each other. I just feel you can't talk about one without at least referencing the other. So let me get into it. So Avengers Endgame, as I'm shooting this video, it's Saturday, April the 27th, 2019, 2:31 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Avengers Endgame is tearing it up at the box office this weekend, on its way to becoming the highest grossing opening weekend in motion picture history by a long shot. According to some industry insiders, there's some speculation here that Avengers Endgame could make anywhere between $300 and $330 million domestic opening weekend, shattering the previous record set by Avengers Infinity War at, what, 257, 260? Something like that. Like, I mean, those margins are ridiculous. No other time in motion picture history has somebody shattered an opening weekend record by that much. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's nearly like $100 million more if the analysis is correct and it ends up being like that. Shocking. But there's reasons why, okay? There's a lot of details in there that the average moviegoer doesn't take into consideration. And I'm not trying to diminish the feat. It's incredible. But there's reasons why. It's not just like everything is even all along and everybody has an even playing field. No. There's reasons why numbers fluctuate like this. And that's what I want to talk about. Let me first say this. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again because it's important. Just because a movie makes a lot of money at the box office doesn't necessarily mean it was a good movie. It can, but the two are not mutually exclusive to each other. There are a ton of examples of movies that make shitloads of money that are awesome movies, right? And then there are just as many examples as movies that are fucking shit shows that also make shitloads of money at the box office. So you can't use the money as the one defining objective factor that means quality. You can't do that, okay? Just because a movie makes a lot of money doesn't necessarily mean it was a good movie. What it does mean, however, is that a lot of people went to see it. But the question then becomes how many of those people that went to see it actually liked it. Because when you go to the movie theater to see a movie, if you don't like that movie that you just watched, you can't then return to the box office and ask for your money back. Nor am I suggesting you should be able to do that. You shouldn't, of course not. But because you can't do that, your money still goes towards the movie you didn't like, right? Every one of us who hated The Last Jedi, it made something like $1.3 billion at the box office, give or take. Well, our money still goes towards the box office total. So that's why you cannot cannot use box office numbers as the one objective defining factor. Sometimes it might mean that, sometimes it might not mean that. So you got to dig a little deeper, right? You have to keep that in mind. You also have to remember that when movies are highly anticipated, right? When when we're dealing with properties like Marvel and DC and Star Wars and Godzilla, when those kind of properties, those kind of movies, especially if they're highly anticipated, okay, are going to make shit loads of money at the box office, especially opening weekend, whether the movie is good or not, because of the anticipation around it. Avengers Endgame is set to make $330 potentially million at the box office. If it makes that much money, that's not a representation of the quality of the movie. Now, that doesn't mean that people didn't like it. If you liked it, that's great. But that's not what that money means, because you didn't know whether you were going to like it prior to going. You had already paid for your ticket before you saw the movie. So that box office total is not a representation of the quality of the movie. It's a representation of how many people went to see it. Right? That's what that 300, 310, 29, whatever it makes, that's what that representation of the box office means. A lot of people went to see it. Then you start to figure out, well, how many of those people liked it? And that might be indicated in the rewatch value, right? In the next weekend and the weekend after that. How far does it drop down? What are the critics saying? What can we anticipate for a second weekend? But you never judge a movie, especially a highly anticipated movie, in terms of quality by how much money it makes opening weekend. You just don't. You don't, because it means nothing. It means literally nothing in terms of quality, because you didn't know whether you were going to like it before you saw it. You'd already paid for it, right? So you have to keep that in mind. There's also many other factors. I hear people saying that, oh my God, it made more money than this movie and that movie, and what, smashing Titanic. Titanic is not a superhero movie. It was released on 2,000 less screens. That's another thing you have to take into consideration. Go to the box office websites and look at how many screens movies were released in over the years. Movies, especially giant blockbusters today, are released on more and more screens. And something else you also have to take into consideration, one of the reasons why Avengers Endgame might be able to make $300 million at the box office is because a lot of theaters are keeping their theaters open for like 3 or 4 days straight, 24 hours a day, so you can go see it at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, you couldn't do that with Titanic in 1997. You couldn't do that with Avatar in 2009, right? I don't even think you could do that with The Force Awakens. So it's not an even playing field. Now, there's reasons why they're doing that, right? They're putting them on more screens. You can go watch at 3 o'clock in the morning. Weekend totals now are like Thursday to Monday, whereas 25 years ago, it was just Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's so many variables at play that make up the number and the details surrounding the number that you got to take into consideration that a lot of people just don't. They just focus on the number. It's not like, The Force Awakens was released in the same amount of theaters, had the same amount of playing time, on the same amount of screens, it wasn't, I'm not saying that The Force Awakens would have made more, I'm just saying that it wasn't, right? Avatar was not released on the same amount of screens, at the same, in the same theaters, on playing 24 hours a day for 3 days. It's almost like comparing apples and oranges. Theater ticket prices. Ticket prices are not what they were in 1997 or 2000 or even 2009. 3D. Now people can charge, it costs like $15 now to go see a regular 3D film. And if you want to see it in IMAX 3D, you're dishing out like $22 a ticket practically, or $18 a ticket. It's insane, right? So there's a lot of variables that make up the total box office number, one of which is not quality. It's not quality. It can be, but not opening weekend numbers. No, not at all, because everybody has unless you're somebody who's privy to a screening, which you get to see for free anyway, okay? The general movie-going audience, which is what the box office total is representing, essentially. That doesn't mean that the pundits haven't then gone and paid for a ticket. But generally speaking, that's what it represents. Well, that $330 million is from, if it makes that money, or 300 or 280, whatever it is, that total is a representation of people who hadn't even seen it yet. So I like to pay more attention, although it's fun and it's always great business for the studio to make that kind of cash. Of course it is, right? This is a business. This is about making money, okay? At the end of the day. And I understand that. If you want to, the real judge of quality is pay attention to what people are saying, the general consensus, and look at the movie the next weekend and then the weekend after that. Does it have competition, right? We know Avengers Endgame. We got Godzilla coming out. We got Aladdin coming out. We got the Pikachu movie coming out, right? It's going to face some stiff competition, right? That's another factor. That's another factor you didn't have 25 years ago. When Jurassic Park was tearing it up at the box office, it didn't have, 90 blockbusters coming up right behind it. Neither did Titanic. And nobody was watching Jurassic Park in 3D, so I mean, you would go and pay $7 for a ticket and that's just what you paid. So in some regards, when you look, and it wasn't playing on nearly as many screens. So when you look at sort of the feat that movies were able to achieve through the 80s and 90s, in some respects, it can almost be more impressive because you didn't have the internet. You didn't have the marketing through social media and through YouTube and through Twitter and through Facebook and through Instagram and through whatever the case is, right? It was a different culture. So in some respects, it can be a little more impressive. When you look at, wow, that movie made like $300 million, or that movie made like $110 million or $90 million opening weekend and you didn't even have the fucking, it can almost be more impressive. Word of mouth plays huge. Avatar made $2.7 billion worldwide because of word of mouth. Titanic made 2.13 or whatever the fuck it is because of word of mouth. Avengers Endgame was bound to make 250, 300 mil opening weekend, whether it was good or not. I'm not saying it's not good, okay? This is not about whether it's good or not. I'm not here trashing Endgame. I'm trying to give some perspective on really the reality of what we're looking at when it comes to box office numbers. And in a lot of cases, it's comparing apples and oranges. Doesn't mean it's not fun to do, but inflation you have to take into consideration, the number of screens you have to take into consideration, competition you have to take into consideration, hype and anticipation for a property or movie you have to take into consideration. Whether the movie is playing 24 hours a day in 1,000 theaters, I mean, that's going to help the fucking movie. And some people look at that and go, well, that's kind of cheating. No, it's not really cheating. It's not cheating per se. It's just like, oh, you go, okay, well, it made more than this movie, but to be fair, it had an advantage because it was playing on 2,000 more screens and it was playing in like 500 theaters 24 hours a day for 3 days. Well, of course it's going to have an advantage. So when we're approaching box office numbers, for me, I always like to look at the variables and the details and just take those things into consideration, because then I feel I can have a much more informed and objective view of the reality of what's really going on, rather than, holy shit, Avengers Endgame just smashed box office records. Yeah, it did. And it will. But here's why. One of which might be quality. One of which might be anticipation. But there's a multitude of other things that helps it get over that hump. So you have to take those things into consideration. So I just wanted to get that off my chest, because it's a pet peeve when I see people doing the box office analysis and the movie pundits talking about, they never talk about, I mean, some do, some will touch on it, but they never talk about that and just try to educate their viewers by saying, hey, this is really cool. Wow, look at this 303. Isn't that awesome? That's awesome. But here's why. Because when you start to look at the here's why, it tends to de-glamorize and de-romanticize, and it feels like, you might be delegitimizing, Avengers Endgame. It has nothing to do with that. It could be a movie I absolutely fucking loved, and I would still be saying the same thing, right? This is about the facts. This is not about, whether the movie's good or not, or whether but I like Avengers. Well, that's great. I'm glad you do. I like Star Wars. I'd be saying the same thing if it was a fucking amazing Halloween movie. I'd be saying the same thing. So those of you that are watching that think I'm saying Avengers Endgame, only made that money, it's not good. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's a multitude of reasons of why a movie makes the money it does, and especially opening weekend, which has nothing to do with quality. Nothing. Especially when we're dealing with a high-octane, highly anticipated movie. Anyways, folks, my name's Dave McRae. Comment below and let me know your thoughts if you want. If you don't, that's okay. I don't really care. I just had to get this off my chest. If you want to follow me on Facebook, you can at facebook.com/manythingsdavemcrae. That's where I tend to post in the meantime and in between time when I'm not posting here. The links are all in the description. So, yeah, I'll talk to you guys soon. Cheers.